Everyone. My name is Kevin Navratil, political science professor at Moraine Valley. I'm also the Democracy Commitment Coordinator. And my two friends and colleagues, Merri Fefles-Dunkle and Deron Schreck, are both political science professors at Moraine Valley. They both teach history, and Merri Fefles-Dunkle also teaches sociology. And the three of us have been exchanging text messages. We typically talk about politics amongst ourselves, and since today is July 3rd, and since the debate that took place between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden last Thursday night, we've been exchanging some text messages about our thoughts. And what we wanted to do is have a recording to kind of share with others who might be interested in some of the questions and thoughts, that kind of initial reactions that we had to the debate, and kind of diving into the national conversation about whether Joe Biden should step down or no longer run for president in 2024. So before we get into that discussion, I want to have a disclaimer that this discussion is just going to focus largely on whether Biden should drop out. Collectively, the three of us have voted for Republicans. We voted for Democrats. We voted for at least one third-party candidate, each of us. And so I think I can speak for all three of us in that in an ideal political world, Trump would not be the Republican nominee. However, he's essentially taken over the Republican Party, and there's no chance that he's going to be replaced as the Republican nominee. And there's really no gatekeeping function in the Republican Party currently. We have had, at least Merri and I have had events on our campus about the threat that Donald Trump poses to democracy, reasons why we think he should not be running. So we feel like we've done that already. But today, our lack of attention on Trump shouldn't be interpreted as Biden being the more flawed candidate, because that's not our position at all. However, within the Democratic Party, there is some debate and discussion about replacing him as a Democratic nominee, and if so, how that process might be conducted. As a recent New York Times op-ed piece stated, the Republican Party has been co-opted by Mr. Trump and his ambitions. The burden rests on the Democratic Party to put the interests above the nation, above the ambitions of a single man. So that's what we're going to do today. And I think one of the things to just kind of start off is maybe going around to each of us and maybe talking about how our own thinking on this may have evolved and what we personally think the Democrats and Joe Biden should do with regards to the 2024 race. So Merri, why don't we start with you?
Okay. So yes, thank you, Kevin, for putting this together. Initially, yeah, I'm gonna just jump right in. Initially, my thinking was, we stay the course. We don't change candidates at this late of the game. I'm not gonna deny that, like, personally, I've had my own reservations about whether or not he was going to go for a second term, but I just kept thinking in the back of my mind that he was not going, that he was maybe thinking about not doing it, and that he didn't want to go for a second term, but didn't want to say it publicly so that as to not be lame duck from the get-go and to not kind of squander political capital. But then he kept saying he's going to go, he's going to go, he's going to go. I kept thinking, well, maybe he'll do it like in March, maybe he'll do it in April. He'll pull like a Lyndon Johnson in '68, who like at the end of March just announced that he was not going to seek another term, because I really didn't think he wanted to go for a second term. I think, and again, I'm not in his mind, I can't predict, but I think that his thinking was, though, that Donald Trump presents such an existential threat that basically he needs to stay in the race to try to defeat him. So I thought, well, this is who we're at the dance with, so we got to stick with him. But this debate was frightening. As I told both Kevin and Deron, like I couldn't watch it. I think I just knew it was not going to be good, and I don't like watching these things generally anyway. I prefer just to read transcripts of them afterwards because they just take too long, and I don't have the patience to sit through them usually. But yeah, the debate was disastrous, and it was interesting to even see the next day the kind of the commentary from people I've listened to for a long time who were completely on board, saying that they've known Biden for many years, people that worked in the Obama White House, saying that he was always been on top of it. They just saw him a couple months ago, and one of them was John Favreau, who used to work for Obama, and saying that Biden asked, "How's your wife?" by name. "How are your kids?" by name. He knew who they are. And this is not a man who's in cognitive decline. He maintains this travel schedule that most people would, I know I would not be able to keep up with at my age, in my 40s. Um, so I thought, okay, he's going to have some points where he's not doing too well. But I think what threw me off so much is that because they scheduled this early, his team, Biden's team, scheduled this so early. Debates don't usually happen until like what, September? I think it's like the earliest debate that's happened before. So it's scheduled now in June, and I think it was to show that he's on top of things. So one of the comments I heard yesterday on Pod Save America that really stuck with me, I wrote it down. Dan Pfeiffer was another Obama White House person who's got lots of years of experience, but he was saying that he's got a hard time believing that the Biden team, um, he's got a lot of faith in them, and he's like, I don't think they would have put him out there with the idea that he wasn't capable of doing the job. So if that is indeed true, and they chose this, they chose the format, they chose the everything about it, it appears that something has changed in just the last couple of months. And that's something that the New York Times article was suggesting yesterday, that there's been kind of a precipitous decline just in the last few months. And even former advisors have gone off record, but are saying, without giving their names, but are saying that basically they have seen a change in him. So, he crossed all these different time zones. Again, that would exhaust all of us. But again, the fact that it wasn't just that he had an off night, like Barack Obama had a bad first debate against Romney in 2012. But this is like beyond that. This was like he couldn't even muster up the ability to like counter anything, counter any of Trump's arguments, and appeared to be kind of confused and whatever. And then the next day appeared to be great, which that if you are at that age, you have good days and bad days. I have good days and bad days in my 40s now. But obviously this man is 81 years old. And so that has worried me. What happens when he gets to be 85, 86? So because of all of that, and because of the fact that the convention is not until August, and although that there's that whole issue of do they do the roll call early, which I'm sure we could jump into a little bit more because of Ohio. That's another concern. So we have 5 weeks maybe, but I think there's enough time to do it. And I think that the risks at this point outweigh the rewards for this outweigh the possible risks of replacing him, which has its own risks. But I think it has to be done, because I think that and we could get into like maybe who can do it after the next question, but I'm just too afraid that the people are so turned off, and whether it's fair or not, what I think is a really good record, and I think history is going to judge him very, very well. I think posterity is going to judge him if he drops out even better. Like he was always a man who put his party, who put his country before his own ambitions and his own self. But yeah, I do think that for that reason, that's kind of where I'm at. Where obviously something has changed, and that he hasn't given any press conferences. He's supposed to go on ABC at the end of the week, but why didn't he do that sooner? And again, I know it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, and I've been very reluctant, as you both know, to criticize, but I think it's too dangerous now, especially with this in the light of this recent Supreme Court decision that essentially grants a president immunity while doing any type of official acts as president. And official acts could be apparently, I guess, assassinating a political rival if you want to. So yeah,
a lot of great points there that hopefully we get time to come
sorry.
back to a lot of those.
Did I do too many?
Well said. No, I look forward to talking about more of those too. Deron, what are your thoughts?
Okay. I too, going into this, waiting for this debate, Kevin and I were talking about this before we started recording, that immediately, as soon as I saw President Biden walk out on stage, I thought something was wrong. He shuffled, he kind of was very like stiff in his gait. And so you kind of, play that off. And then when former President Trump came out, he looked like he was, a lumbering big man, and he doesn't swing his arms. He's kind of hunched over when he walks. He's a big guy. And so he gets to the podium and they get started. And immediately, within 5 minutes of Joe Biden giving his opening statement, he messed some words up like trillionaires and billionaires. And he ended at one point, I don't know if it was in the opening statement, but he opened up one of his statements by saying he defeated Medicare. And he stopped at times during his speech or during his answers We talked about this in some text back and forth. Point one, point two, point one, and point three, and he was confusing himself and trying to make all of these statements about what he had done as president. And I initially got up and walked out of the room to do dishes or something like that, just to get out and walk away, because it was pretty rough to watch. And if you listened to the debate as it was going on, you would hear that Biden was talking about issues, and I don't know what Donald Trump was talking about at times. There was one that really stood out. There was a question about childcare, and former President Trump brought up something, I think, about Ukraine or Russia or Putin or North Korea. It was still about childcare. Then Joe Biden had the chance to talk about childcare and just say that, what was the question again? It was about childcare. Oh, okay. My opponent didn't talk about that. Instead, he answered what Trump was talking about at that moment. Then they went back to Donald Trump, and they said, remember, the question is about childcare, and he still went back to the issue of whatever he brought up. There was a lot of nonsense during this debate, and initially I thought, okay, well, the nonsense kind of threw Biden off his game. But if you listen to some of the issues that he talked about, there was one issue that Biden could have talked about and knocked it out of the park, and that was about abortion. And he didn't have a cognitive or a cogent way of talking about how he would be pro-choice for the next 4 years. That didn't happen. And then his closing remarks, which I don't remember offhand, for good reason, because they kind of just reminded me of the entire debate, that it was just a train wreck.
Yeah.
I took it as initially, okay, he just had a bad day. And so I gave myself maybe 24, 48 hours to really sit back and think about it, and to come to the conclusion that he would have to drop out. In order for a couple of things, in order for the country to have a competition between a candidate who has said on day one he will be a dictator versus another candidate who is just with it on the issues, and maybe in more modern sense, he is young or she is young, they are go-getters, and that's what the Democratic Party needs. Not just for now, but they need it for the long run. They have a huge list of people they can pick from, and I know we're going to talk about those too. But I've said this many times, the Democratic Party has always had this idea that, shut up, this is our candidate. You can vote all you want, but we've already predetermined who our nominee is going to be. And I always tell the students that ever since Obama ran and won, that was supposed to be Hillary Clinton's year in terms of what the Democratic Party was thinking. So Obama wins, and then he gets reelected. And instead of saying, we need to go with this youth movement, it's really making sense. We need to get somebody in their 40s and 50s. They go back and say, okay, it's Hillary's turn. No, Hillary Clinton's term was 8 years earlier. Then she loses, and they had to remember at that 2020 debate, they had 15, 20 candidates on the Democratic side. And Jim Clyburn got up and remember, Joe Biden was not polling well. He didn't have the support. And it wasn't until Jim Clyburn came out and said, he's our guy, whether you like it or not. And it was like, wow, he's sounding like the Democratic Party of 20 years, at least the last 20 years, where shut up, this is going to be our nominee. And everybody faded away, lost that primary, and Joe Biden becomes the nominee, wins. And for 4 years, he has done most of the things that he set out to do. But I've always felt that Biden was a transitional president, that he was supposed to be there for 4 years. Well, the reason why I came from the perspective of that Biden needs to run again is that nobody else was running.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody else ran. So it's either Trump or Biden. And and I'm not going with the authoritarian, in my mindset. I'll go with the person who's in favor of democracy because that's the most important thing that I think is on the ballot right now. But yet he could not articulate that position in that debate. There were certain things that happened that I'm watching it. I'm like, Joe Biden is standing there with his mouth wide open. Joe Biden is standing there looking puzzled. He looks confused about issues that were like home runs for the Democratic Party, and he couldn't even like get a single off of it. So there are many people that the Democrats could put up there, and there are many people that the voters, I think, need to see within the Democratic Party who are younger. They have a great bench from a Democratic standpoint that would articulate the positions a whole lot better than somebody who's 81. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that David French, who is an opinion writer of the New York Times, said this today on Threads. The age issue isn't just a strategy issue. Can he win? It's a fitness issue. Can he serve? At the current rate of decline, does anyone have confidence he has 4 more years of effective service? Asking Americans to vote for a potentially unfit man to stop another unfit man isn't just foolish, it's wrong. There are Democrats who are better able to campaign than Biden and actually unquestionably fit to serve. And, you have people like former Speaker Pelosi coming out today who said that they needed to have cognitive tests for candidates. And I don't mean this as a slight, but this is the perspective of the Democratic Party. She's 2 years older than Biden, and she's saying that. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Democrats kind of put themselves into this position. And I say this part facetiously. Trump said the only reason why he's running is because Biden is running. So if Biden no longer runs, can Trump step down?
Right.
So I would say that he needs to be replaced at this point. And I have some numbers that I could, I don't have the chance to share it, but I'll at least read it to you about where I come from in that position too.
Yeah.
Thank you. And excellent points too. And I feel like we could talk for hours on this topic. And before we get into some of maybe the follow-ups on some of the points that you raised, I want to do the same that you did and kind of do a brief overview. And I think the context I wanted to share is that in 2016, the day after Trump won the election, the first class that I held, I had several students who were wondering, what are the Democrats going to do? Who could beat Trump the next time? And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I did point out to that class that I thought Biden would be the best candidate in 2020, in part because of the blue wall, Biden being from Pennsylvania and really having kind of an appeal with some of the voters who Democrats had lost, especially the white males without a college degree. I thought that Biden would be the most competitive candidate for Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Going into 2020, I thought that despite the 15 or whatever competitors that he had, I thought I remember having a lot of discussions with younger Democrats who wanted a much more liberal candidate. Oh, thanks for joining the conversation.
Daphne's joining us.
Yeah, good to have Daphne in the room. That Biden was to Deron's point, going to be a transitional president, and was really the best candidate that might be able to unite all the different factions within the Democratic Party, and that there was kind of a group of candidates who I think were going to be ready for 2024, maybe 2028, but they weren't quite ready yet. A lot of young governors or senators, people who weren't nationally tested yet. Honestly, I don't really know when I finally changed my mind on this, but it could have been just from Thursday. But I definitely no longer feel that Biden should stay in the race. I question whether he should even stay in as president the months. But at a minimum, I think he should focus. He can't multitask. I think, as Merri pointed out, Deron's pointed out, the stakes are too high. Democracy's on the line. What a second Trump term would look like. Project 2025 and so many other things. I think the stakes are too high, not only for the presidency, but for House of Representatives, for the key Senate races. I really worry that Biden has the ability to drag down all three of those branches of government. I'm sorry, all three of those chambers with the House, Senate, and presidency. And a few of the reasons why I give this point of view of Biden should step it down, I worry that he can't campaign, step down from the presidential race. He needs to be able to be out there giving interviews. I was really surprised that he couldn't give a Super Bowl interview, which is something that recent presidents have done. It's just a great opportunity to reach a huge part of the population. And part of the reason I think some of us may have been hesitant or not fully aware of maybe where he was at cognitively and energy level and so many different things is he's been hidden from the public. And you have to question why he has, with modern presidents, the fewest interviews and press conferences and so forth. He's just missing huge opportunities, and to the point of whether it was a one bad night type of deal like Obama had in 2012. The narrative with Biden has been for years about his being too old and whether he's cognitively fit, and to come out after 5 days rest and Camp David and preparing for this and calling for this debate and having that be your performance, it raises a lot of red flags. And since then, I was telling you, I think with text messages, then why not have like a late night TV type interview to follow up? And, granted, he had his rally in North Carolina, but that was a teleprompter. So I just don't think he can meet the moment. He needs to be out in battleground states. He needs to be giving interviews. He needs to be more public, visible to the public. And I worry that his closest insiders, including his wife and sister, are really protecting him. And we've had these stories from the New York Times and others that's saying that he basically is really only active between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. So we do have this interview with George Stephanopoulos. I think the first part of it's going to drop on Friday. So I think he has a small window to maybe right this ship, but I just don't think he can do it. About nearly 80% of Americans thought he was too old, months ago, years ago. And so, as you both raised, can he do this job for the next 4 to 5 years, I think is a big question. Another point is that he did defeat Donald Trump in 2020. So there is this argument amongst Democrats that he and he alone can beat Trump because he did beat Trump. But he did so barely. He did so by roughly 45,000 votes spread amongst 3 states. And one of the things that I didn't even remember is I was going back through today of looking at the national polls back in 2020 and going through the entire year of 2020. And at this same point in 2020, Biden had a 9%. When you take all the different polls, because some of them varied from a 5% lead to 15% lead, but on average, he had a 9% polling advantage nationally at this point. He had a 7% advantage nationally in the latest polls right before the 2020 election. He ultimately won the popular vote with 4.4%. And by having a 4.5% or 4.4% national popular advantage, it translated into winning the Electoral College again by 45,000 votes. This time around, he's down. Today, the Siena New York Times poll had him down 8% with registered voters, 6% amongst likely voters. He has polls since the debate have shown him losing 2 to 3%. His margin with Trump has dropped even lower by about 3%. He's down in every single swing state. He's down, and this is the part that I think really stands out to me. Democrats have done very well in a lot of elections in the last 4 years. They overperformed in 2020 compared to historical standards. They've won a lot of special elections. And if you look, this came out today in today's New York Times. Is Nate Silver, the title of it was "Doing Nothing About Biden is the Riskiest Plan of All." And he's basically saying that it's not the party that is uncompetitive, the Democrats, it's Biden. And he's basically showing that that there's 5 presidential swing states that also have Senate races up in 2024. And those are Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And in those states, there's been 47 nonpartisan surveys conducted since Biden and Trump have emerged as the nominees. In 46 of those 47 polls, the Democratic Senate candidate has polled better than Mr. Biden. He and the Senate candidate performed equally well in one poll. So basically, Biden is it's not that the Democrats are unpopular compared to Republicans. It's that Biden's unpopular compared to Trump. And so I think this argument that only Biden can win is not true. And I think he's destined for defeat. And one other point that I initially started with when I was thinking about this, back when I was in graduate school, I remember doing research and reading books about how there's moods in each election cycle. And I think if you think about the national mood, that it's not just in the United States, but internationally, that there's kind of an anti-elite, anti-establishment. There's a lot of anxiety about rapid changes technologically, culturally, and high inflation, is a real concern amongst people. And they largely attributed that to Biden, I think wrongly, but it is what it is. Perception is reality. And I just don't know that an 81-year-old candidate who rarely talks to the people, and when they do, stumbles and loses their train of thought, is the right candidate for this moment. So for those reasons, I'll stop and say that I think that Biden should also stop, and he should stop running for the 2024 election. So I think maybe it might be worth pointing out maybe what are some of the reasons why why Biden should stay in the race. And it isn't necessarily our own arguments, but just arguments that are out there of why Biden should stay in the race. I know, Merri, you've talked about how he's been historically a pretty good president who's gotten a lot done. He's gotten a lot done despite having very narrow margins in the House and the Senate his first 2 years, and then facing off against a Republican House of Representatives in the last 2 years. So what are some of the arguments of why Biden should not drop out?
Well, one of the arguments is, who does he get replaced with? We have somebody we already know kind of what the negative arguments are against him, and of course they're pretty formidable. And again, I'm having a little harder time arguing this now because, than I was a couple of days ago, as you both have kind of indicated too. But the idea is that if you put somebody in there who's not battle tested, like it's really hard to prepare anybody for a general election. So you're essentially throwing somebody into the wolves. So unless they've already been through it, which kind of this bleeds a little bit into question number 2 about, maybe who could possibly replace him. You have to put somebody in there that is not going to kind of like peter out the way that Ron DeSantis did, right? You got like Ron DeSantis, who was like, that the Republicans were looking at with this great hope that was going to, overtake Trump, and he got out there to basically like kind of just fizzle out, along with many other candidates who were pinned as supposed to be the great next hope of whichever party. So part of it is a concern that whoever you put in there next, are they going to be able to handle the general, and what's going to come out about them in the meantime? And is that going to be enough? Is the change going to be too much? That's one. And then the person who is the most, seems to be most next in line, just Kamala Harris, was polling before worse than Biden was. Now, I think that could possibly, that could shift. I think it would shift if she was the nominee. But I think that's one of the arguments that was given for just kind of stay the course and don't change it. So that's one. I have others, but like I said, I'm having a harder time, and I'm sorry for Daphne participating in this as well, along with me.
You said that's one, but I think that is a huge one. And
Yeah.
I think that the chaos, the potential chaos of the various factions. So one of the things, it could certainly be Kamala Harris, who's part of the ticket. If I were to guess, I would say there's a better than 50% chance that she would be the nominee. I think that's what Biden would want. Biden's a fiercely loyal person. I think that we were talking before we started recording, Merri, you brought up that James Clyburn has essentially said that if Biden were to step down, that it should definitely be, without question, it should be Kamala. So I think one of the concerns here at this point, if you were to open up the Democratic convention to any candidate. And if Kamala were to get passed up, when I was talking earlier about all the different factions within the Democratic Party, certainly one of the core constituencies is African American voters, and the way that passing up the African American vice presidential candidate, another key core constituency is women, the Democratic Party, and maybe passing over a Black woman candidate. Just the way that could really, and Democrats have really lost some support with minority groups, especially African Americans, in recent years. I mean, certainly they still have a majority who support. There's a clear advantage that Democrats have amongst African American voters. That being said, it's not as high as it once was in terms of the proportion of people who indicate that they would vote for a Democrat. And so just this civil war that, those of us who have read about, I wasn't alive in the 1968 Democratic National Convention that was also in Chicago, but, you ended up, Deron, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, going back to the original question, it's really, for me, I think the public looks at it from the perspective of certainty versus the unknown. So if you have Trump versus Biden, okay, well, that's what my mind was fixated on. And if you're going to tell me that Biden has to drop out now in order for a Democrat to win, well, I can't handle that because I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months. And just recently, I'm just looking at it now, 5 minutes ago, it was posted on Threads that President Biden, on a campaign call that just wrapped up, said, let me say this as clearly as possible, that I can, as simply and straightforward as I can. I am running. No one's pushing me out. I'm not leaving. I'm in this race to the end, and we're going to win. Now, it's possible that, Biden could win. I understand that. But let's go back to what was said before, that I mentioned before. For another 4 years, you're going to have an 85, 86-year-old person in office. And who's going to be calling the shots? And people are already asking now, who's calling the shots? So I still hold on to it that the reason why people want Biden to stay there is because it's just going to keep everything certain that this is who the nominee is going to be, and we're going to deal with the cards where they fall later on. And the issue with that, however, is that you're making a decision now that may have an implication on the future of this country's democracy for the next 4 years. So I'm going to go also to what Merri said about, you have these candidates who, these people who were thinking about who might be a better Democrat to run, who have never run on the national scale before. Running it for governor and running for senator or representative in the House is a totally different bird than running for president. You have to know the nuances of what people in Nevada like versus the people of Florida versus the people of North Carolina, and how the people of Michigan are different than the people of Wisconsin, and so on and so forth. And you have to have a certain talent for that. The problem is that Biden is a little bit tired, in trying to convey his message out there. And going back to what you said, Kevin, about 1968, the reason why we have a primary system the way we have it today is from something called the 1970 McGovern-Fraser Commission, where we essentially said that when we vote in the primaries, the primary vote matters. And that's how the delegates are going to be split up, essentially, at the convention. You already know who the nominee is going to be before you get to the convention. So the convention is basically just a beauty contest. It's already, I don't know what's going on there with my background, but all of a sudden there's fireworks going
really
on.
Good
I must have said something that set it off. Holy cow.
Celebration.
I'd rather have a dog walk behind me. Yeah. So what happened is I'm going to watch the language then because I'm afraid to see what's going to come up if I say the wrong thing. So what happened in 1970 is they came up with a commission to make sure that the delegate system matters. The reason why is because in 1968, the person with the most delegates essentially was Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. The person with the most delegates after he was assassinated was Eugene McCarthy. However, the Democratic Party didn't want Eugene McCarthy, who was a far left candidate at that time, to be the nominee. So what they did is they asked Vice President Humphrey, would you like to be the nominee? He said, sure. the delegates were released to Humphrey, and Humphrey did not run in one single primary. He became the nominee and lost. And you saw at the Democratic convention in Chicago complete chaos. Everybody saw it firsthand. But it's not the only time we've had crazy conventions. In 1924, for example, it took the Democrats 103 tries to get their nominee, who was John Davis. He did not start off as the nominee, but at that time, basically the party leaders and the bigwigs were choosing the delegates. So what happens now, even I just read something that James Clyburn said that we may even have to want for a mini primary in the next 4 months. And I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to do that? So if I want to keep Biden as the nominee simply because of stability, that's not a good reason for it. And nobody is going to believe his record anyway. Nobody believes the data. So no matter what he was saying at the debate, didn't matter. Nobody believed it anyway.
Yeah.
So in order for him to stay as the nominee, he's going to have to simplify things. He's going to have to get out in the public, and I don't know if he could do either one. And to answer the other question, to answer the original question, it's because of certainty versus the unknown. That if we just keep it Trump versus Biden, I understand what's going on. But if Biden were to step down, which I don't think he will, but if Biden were to step down, what's next? And I think that's a big fear amongst many people.
Kevin, can I make one quote, which is because it's actually part and parcel to what Deron just said. It's from Professor Alan Lichtman. He's the guy that's got the 13 keys to predicting who's going to win the presidency. And he's saying that the party in the White House has never won an open seat with an uncertain or contested nominee since the dawn of the 20th century. So that's also just another reason, if you're talking about why to stay the course and why not to change it with ballots already being printed and things like that. That kind of goes to what Deron was just saying.
Yeah, and I think he basically said it would be crazy for the Democrats to replace Biden. Yeah, so a lot of great points there. I think to point out that in a convention at this point, since Biden won the majority, or pretty much all of the delegates, that you would have to unbound those and open it up. And the way that having party insiders decide the candidate for the first time since 1968, which didn't go over well at all with the public, and ultimately for a lot of different reasons resulted in a lot of violence in the streets of Chicago, Grant Park and Michigan Avenue and so forth, that there's just a lot of concerns that this could be another version of that. And again, I think that just having all these different factions within the Democratic Party and people like Gavin Newsom, and I'm not necessarily trying to leapfrog into that part of it yet, but people who think that they're the next in line as a Democratic standard bearer, J.B. Pritzker, Whitmer from Michigan, and some senators. The list goes on, and just that kind of fighting, jockeying for position, maybe who's vice presidential candidate, could be a downside for Democrats. I also think it could be an upside. I mean, it could be must-watch TV. A lot of Americans might clearly Americans are not happy with these two choices right now. I mean, that is obvious, and I think we often lose sight of that. So shaking up this race and potentially the mini primaries and getting the American public, at least on the Democratic side, involved so close to the election could be the shot in the arm that the Democrats need. Couple other points. Yeah, invigorating. A couple other points about why Biden should stay in the race. There was an article in the Atlantic today. I want to say it was Stuart Stevens, but it's one of those the Lincoln Project group people who were former Republicans who have kind of gone on a mission to attack Trump and try to defeat him both in 2020 and 2024. Was saying that Trump is a candidate of chaos, uncertainty, and erratic behavior. Democrats can win a race against him by offering Americans the opposite: steady, calm, confident leadership. And that was a quote from an article in today's Atlantic. And I think that in a lot of ways, Biden can, those are some of his strengths, some of his personality traits that I think that made him a transitional president, that maybe that steady leadership is what the Democrats need right now. It would be undemocratic to have party insiders just kind of plant a new candidate for us without the Democratic voters' input. I think there's also an argument that, one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton lost in 2006 to Donald Trump was how poorly she did with whites, especially white males. And Biden has done better. Whites are the still majority of voters in the United States, and so it's a huge constituency or huge demographic group that you need to be competitive with. You can still win an election by losing white voters, but it's the margins of how much you lose by. And I think one of the things that Biden did well is he kind of cut into the margin that Trump had in 2016. And I maybe we already said it, but just to repeat, I think Biden's been a very successful president. He's got a lot of bipartisan accomplishments and infrastructure and CHIPS Act and so many more. But that's, again, not really the point of this, of whether he's been a successful president. It's whether he can continue to be a successful president. And I think, as we pointed out, there's just a lot of concerns that the American people have about him being able to stay healthy, stay mentally fit, being able to lead a country in very uncertain times globally. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I'll turn it back over to you, is that another kind of downside with Biden, the war in Gaza has been awful. There's also a war in Ukraine. Both of these wars are awful, and I'm not trying to have a competition of which one deserves more sympathy. There's all kinds of international events happening. I think there's a horrific situation going on in Sudan. I could go on and on. But I think on the Democratic side in particular, it's been a huge dividing mark of what's been happening in Israel and Gaza and Palestine, because there's two huge demographics on the Democratic side. Jewish people of the Jewish faith, overwhelmingly Democratic voters, some of which have felt that Joe Biden has not been supportive enough of Israel and needs to be stronger in his support for Netanyahu and Israel, or anti-Semitism that's going on U.S. campuses. Also, key demographic voting bloc for Democrats, Arab voters, people of the Muslim faith. And especially in swing states like Michigan, these are key voting groups that Democrats need to have. In 2016, I think Michigan was lost by like 11,000 votes, right? I think Democrats won it by over 100,000, maybe closer to 150,000 votes in 2020. But the argument is that these voters are really important. And so Biden, rightly or wrongly, has alienated both of those groups. And so there is kind of a reset that having somebody who's not Joe Biden could potentially help with kind of bringing back some core constituencies to the Democratic Party, because I think there's just a lot of apathy, alienation, and people who feel that their leadership has failed them.
See, okay, so I completely agree with all of that. What has always bothered me for a long time in American politics is that we, especially thinking on the Democratic side, we have this disposition that, it's got to be the shiny new penny, right? It's got to be somebody young and dynamic. And I think that the argument coming out of the Biden camp about that Trump's ideas are old, right? That if you look at what Biden's actually legislated on, he's been, I think, probably, whether you like what he's done or not like what he's done, he's gotten the most accomplished legislatively. He got more accomplished in 4 years than Barack Obama did in 8. So, because of Barack Obama's youth, and that was one of the things that actually gave me concern about Barack Obama back in the day, was that he was too young. He was too inexperienced, and that's why he ran at that time. He didn't have a record that anybody could pin on him, right? He didn't have anything to look back on. And that was one of the reasons why I was concerned about him. I wanted somebody who had experience, who knew how to work with Congress, who knew how to get bills passed. And that's something that Biden has proved that he can do. But unfortunately, there's this disconnect between, I think, what those of us who are kind of in the biz, so to speak, what we know to be true, and what people, their perception. And perception is reality. But we always seem to have this thing about wanting to go for what is the shiny new thing, as though just somehow youth automatically means that you're going to know what you're doing. And it doesn't. Just because you're young and you're vigorous doesn't mean that you know what, like, you mentioning about Israel, like, Biden was on that call with Netanyahu the night of with Iran, with the attacks with Iran, and basically Biden was saying to Netanyahu, and according to people that were in the room, this was super late at night. He was forceful, and he's like, if you do this, you're going alone. We're not backing you. And Netanyahu backed down. So he's proven that he could do these things, and I guess I'm starting to kind of drift back towards this argument of why he should stay on there. And one of the things I think that's also sort of um, I've noticed over the years about Biden is that he seems to have been treated by it with some kind of a little bit of disdain from, I think, more like the kind of the Obama camp. He was passed up in 2016 in favor of Hillary Clinton, and it was basically said that he didn't run because Bo was sick, and when actually, according to what has also emerged, that Bo wanted him to run, and was in favor of him running. And he just kind of, kept quiet and let them anoint Hillary Clinton, but that probably could he have beaten Donald Trump in 2016? Probably could have. Again, I'm playing Monday morning quarterback. I get that, but all these are things that to me, I guess as somebody, we are people that look at this differently than the rest of the American public does, and it doesn't matter because, again, perception is people's reality, and that's how they vote. But I think it kind of irks me sometimes that we automatically drift towards this idea that if they're young, that automatically they know. No, it doesn't mean that experience does count for something. But I will go back to again this idea of I think we've crossed this line of if he had this perfect moment to be able to demonstrate to people that despite his age, he knew exactly what was going on and he could still lead the country, and he wasn't able to do that. And again, they asked for the debate to be held in June. So if this was happening in September, we wouldn't be able to change anything right now. I'd be like, okay, done. He's our candidate. He's our guy. It is what it is. But it's still kind of early enough that something can still be done. So, oh, and also the anti-incumbency thing throughout the entire world. You mentioned, to
Yeah.
your point, Kevin, this has been happening not just with people here, but there's an
Yeah.
anti-incumbency wave that's occurring and I'm not sure what exactly that's stemming from. Is it due to social media and the way that maybe like videos that emerge online and people, again, altering people's perception of events?
Yeah, two quick points on that is Biden's actually faring better than most Western incumbents,
Yes.
including the Canadian Prime Minister, so I'm not just saying
Well,
Europe, but also the United States and Canada. Biden has slightly better approval ratings than most Western candidates or most Western incumbents, and I think the speculation is immigration, which is a global, the number of migrants globally. Inflation is another huge global concern. Darren, I don't know if you had a point. There's two quick points I wanted to make. I don't know if this is going to interrupt what you were about to say, but I'll just say it. Trump, who does he want to run against? Who really knows, right? But I think in some ways we might know, because if he didn't want to run against Biden, wouldn't he be calling for the 25th Amendment and
yes.
other hey,
Right.
No, don't do that.
He's been pretty silent on this. Might be pretty telling. And so the other part is, what does Obama think? And of course, Obama did have a tweet shortly after the debate, basically saying he too had a bad night. And I can't off the top of my head remember everything that he tweeted, but it was supportive of Joe Biden. But yet we're also hearing kind of off record that, I think Barack Obama is a very politically astute person. And I think he has communicated to the Biden campaign before the debate that he had a lot of concerns with the way the campaign was being run, and that the likelihood of Biden being able to defeat Trump, I think he had a lot of concerns about that. And I've heard, through, off unnamed sources that, again, that Obama has those concerns and I think is communicating those. And I think there's back channel ways of communicating that to Biden. And also the other point with that is David Axelrod, who was he the campaign manager for Obama in 2008?
I think so.
A key advisor, huge
advisor.
Huge connection with Obama, right? And so he went on record quite some time ago, basically saying he didn't think Biden should run. And that's not to say that he's a surrogate for Obama and that Obama's trying to have his connections say these things. But I would be very surprised if Axelrod would go that route. And as Merri, you pointed out, you listen to Pod Save America and Pod Save the World, and a lot of the former staffers for Obama have been very critical too of whether Biden should stay in the race.
The current Prime Minister of the UK, who is not going to be the Prime Minister of the UK very much longer, is 44 years old. His opponent is 61. Justin Trudeau is 51. So when I'm talking about a youth movement, what I feel happened, and they lost their window of opportunity, was to build on when Obama was president, that they could continue to do so year after year after year. So what they did is they just went backwards in terms of like Clinton and then Biden. And now when we see other candidates, we say, well, they're untested. Well, they're untested because the party kind of pushed them down and said, you're going to be the senator, and you're going to be a governor, and you're going to wait 4 years. You're going to wait 8 years, and then you're going to come into the limelight. But by that point, their window of opportunity might have been missed. So I found this poll that was done by the Data for Progress on June 28th, a little bit over 1,000 likely voters. And it was put out by the Biden campaign. Now, this is what the Biden campaign said about what I'm about to read to you. At the end of the day, we would end up switching to candidates who would, according to the polls, be less likely to win than Joe Biden, the only person ever to defeat Donald Trump. That's spin, because the poll shows that every single candidate who is tested against Donald Trump, not one time does Donald Trump get over 48%. With Donald Trump versus Biden, Trump has 48, Biden has 45. Harris versus Trump, 45-48. Buttigieg, 48-47. Booker, 44-46. Newsom, 44-47. 44-46, Whitmer with the 44. Klobuchar, 43. Trump, 46. Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania, 43-46. And Pritzker of Illinois, 43-46. Now, you might look at that and say, well, the numbers are very similar, Deron, so what's the big deal? The unsure is lowest with Biden versus Trump and Harris versus Trump, where it's 7%. So people have already made up their minds about Biden and Harris versus Trump. There's very little wiggle room for that 7% in which they're going to go either to Biden or Trump. With Pritzker or Shapiro, there's an 11% unknown or unsure. Shapiro is 12% unsure. So a candidate like them, if they went out and campaigned, I'm not saying they are, but if they went out and campaigned, there's a segment of the population out there that's willing to listen to somebody else other than Donald Trump in the general election. The Biden and Harris team, separately, there's very little wiggle room for them to get that unsure on their side. So this was conducted on the 28th. So I'm looking at the date now. If you're looking at the 28th, it was conducted the day after the debate.
Yeah.
And so Trump only gets 48. Biden gets 45, but the unsure is very, very small with those two.
Yeah.
And if you did Harris versus Trump, it's still the same numbers and still the same unsure. So the public is, at least Democratic voters, they're looking, or I should say likely voters in general, they're looking for somebody else. They're dying for somebody else. It's just the window of opportunity of having that extra candidate come out or that new candidate come out is very small.
So for future listeners, and especially some of my American government students who I may have watched this, partly what's happening here is that a lot of these other candidates don't have the name recognition.
Right.
They don't have the national name recognition. And so by having a few months to, have the Democratic war chest behind you of being able to do campaign advertisements, doing interviews, doing debates potentially, there's a bunch of potential for those people who are unfamiliar with these candidates to become familiar with them. And I agree with you, Deron, a lot, where it's pretty baked in with Kamala Harris and Biden. And so I think let's speculate a little bit here. We don't, Biden hasn't stepped down, as Deron just stated. Biden's pretty insistent he won't step down. I have a lot of worries that Biden may not step down, in part because of his family and advisors who are kind of, I think, out of touch with the American public. But let's just say that he does step down. We can talk. I think again, Kamala Harris, I think, has got the best chance of replacing Biden because she's currently on the ticket. She would inherit. She would be the only one to inherit the 210 million plus war chest that they have for the 2024 election. I think that's huge. But let's just play a little bit of the final few minutes here, just kind of speculating with some of the other candidates of names that are out there. Gavin Newsom, California Governor, Gretchen Whitmer, Michigan Governor, J.B. Pritzker, Illinois Governor, Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania Governor, Andy Beshear, Kentucky Governor, Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary. I know Merri may have.
Merri loves him.
Okay, all right.
I love him.
Amy Klobuchar, Minnesota Senator Raphael Warnock, Georgia Senator Sherrod Brown, Ohio Senator, and those aren't the only names, and maybe some of those are outsiders at best. But thoughts, maybe dream team, president, vice president, anybody you personally like.
Yeah. Oh, I can't hear Deron.
Darren, are you muted?
Oh, there we go. And Pritzker, I would say, has the money to run on his own if he were to do so. And he's also called out Donald Trump in, I don't know, there's that speech that he made at I think it was at Northwestern, I can't remember the college, where he basically called out bullies or people who are the loudest, make no sense, or have nothing to show you or something like that. So he's one. And Governor Shapiro from Florida has a pretty good resume in a short period of time because of the shutdown of I-95, which was rebuilt like in a week or two, and he got everybody going. I've always been kind of hesitant about senators running because they're kind of entrenched with the institution of the Senate and the mindset of the Senate. And I think you kind of see that with Joe Biden still in the way he discusses issues and talks about people on both sides of the aisle and things like that. He comes from an institutional perspective. And so I would just say a Pritzker or a Shapiro, probably resume wise. I might be kind of short on it, but it might be something that people would be interested in seeing.
Yeah.
Even Gretchen Whitmer, she has a story to tell about, the insanity of the people who wanted to overthrow the Michigan government, and some people wanted to assassinate her,
Kidnap her and assassinate her.
during the pandemic. So there's a story to tell there to the American public about what's going on in the deepest crevices of this country and darkest areas of this country.
Yeah. Do you want me to go next, or do you want to go, Kevin, or do you want me to go next?
Go ahead.
Okay, so as you both know, I love me some Mayor Pete. I would love to see him, but I don't think that this would be the right. I do think. Okay, let me say this first. I think it has to be somebody who, because if we're going back to that argument over how to run an election, even if you've run in a primary, it's not the same as a general, but at least the oppositional research has already been done. So out of those candidates who ran in 2020, they were all running oppositional research on one another, on themselves. They've got stuff already. So I think it would make more sense to have somebody who's already run in a primary, and you've got a lot of good candidates from that group. I'm more of an institutionalist like Joe Biden, so I actually wouldn't have a problem with it. But I do agree with Deron that I think it would be better personally. And I'm not saying this is necessarily who I would want number one, but I think that Gavin Newsom would be phenomenal. I think Gavin Newsom is governor of California. He's got baggage, yes, he does, but he is pugnacious. He will go on Fox News and he will debate. He'll take the debate right to people. He has no problem doing it. I think Trump would be scared to death of him. I think he would just, I really think that and to your point before, Kevin, about who would Trump want to run against. Trump does want to run against Biden. He is scared about running against somebody else. And as far as so whether it's a Trump, Buttigieg combination, or excuse me, Newsom, Buttigieg, obviously for Kamala Harris, she's not going to go on a VP ticket for anybody else. I do see how that would be an insult. It would be perceived as an insult to Black America, but they don't all speak with one voice as well. I think that Darren's point is a good point about that people are they are dying. They are thirsty for something, right? They want somebody different. And so I think if I think Kamala Harris on her own, if she were not part of the Biden team anymore, I think there is a lane for her that she could strike out on her own. I still have a hard time understanding whenever somebody says to me, "Well, she's terrible." I'm like, "Well, what has she done?" Okay, she was given the task about the border, but like that's a
Yeah.
Herculean task. When you've got a Congress who's not doing anything, what could the vice president do? I said, what did Mike Pence do when he was vice president? What did Al Gore do when he was, Dick Cheney did a lot, but do we want that? Like, I don't know if we want that
Yeah.
necessarily. Like vice presidents traditionally aren't known for their own platforms and doing their own thing. They're a voice for for within the cabinet. They're part of the presidential administration. So she really hasn't been given that opportunity. She's run on her own, and her campaign wasn't great, but that was 4 years ago. I think that like there is a chance for her to kind of stake out a claim. And I think that she would do pretty well. When she's argued about for abortion rights, she's been very forceful. She's had good crowds. I mean, I think that she really hasn't been given that chance yet. So I think those are the people that I think is I do agree with you. I think that the polling is clear. And I think that in terms of getting people on board, if you want to get your people like Jim Clyburn and people like that, if you want to get those people on board, you're going to have to go with someone. You have to go with the vice president.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the best possible choice to get, at least to get to kind of, we're kind of meeting halfway, right? It's somebody new, it's somebody different. She's maybe not new, but she's different. Um,
Yeah.
and you're not throwing out the vice president out of that category, which would be not be the best signal to send to the Black community or the Asian community for that matter, as the first or the female, the first Black female Asian woman as vice president. Again, though, I do reject the idea that people don't automatically vote just simply on identity politics. But I
Right.
do think it would not be the best look, I think.
Right. A few things, thoughts that I have. So we earlier were talking about how Biden missed a bunch of opportunities during the debate to attack Trump, to push back against things that Trump said. And I do agree that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom, for that point, would be very great, very good at prosecuting, arguments against Donald Trump and being more focused in, attacking him, whether it's on abortion or his history when he was president. I'd probably, for all the reasons that Merri mentioned, Kamala Harris is the current vice president. I think she's the most likely to replace Biden. I do want to, so just with senators, I'll say this first. I think that Sherrod Brown was somebody who I probably preferred Sherrod Brown for the Democrats back in 2020, but he didn't run. I think he would be great. He's from Ohio. One of the things to keep in mind, if it was him or Raphael Warnock, that you're really losing one of the Democratic senators in a really tough state, that a Republican governor would replace them with a Republican. So you're
Yes.
going to lose a senator, which I don't know is something that Democrats should be doing. What I would say my top three candidates, I'm very focused on the blue wall that I mentioned earlier of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Connected to that, of course, Minnesota, you need to keep that in the Democratic column, in Illinois. But I think those two, you're more likely to do so if you have a candidate who appeals well in the three states that I mentioned, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I worry that Gavin Newsom has national appeal, but I don't know how the voters of those three states I just mentioned view him. And I think that Gretchen Whitmer, J.B. Pritzker, Josh Shapiro, Whitmer's from Michigan, or governor of Michigan, Shapiro's governor of Pennsylvania. I think those two candidates are very appealing. And then, as Deron mentioned, J.B. Pritzker's got buckets of money to assist with campaign expenses. So those are probably my three that I would put up there. If Kamala wasn't the presidential candidate, and it was one of those three people I just mentioned, that I think, one of the candidates I think is really, he's not a candidate, but somebody who I'd like to see eventually be a candidate is Hakeem Jeffries, although he's angling for the Speaker of the House job. So I think if it was any of those three people I just mentioned, Whitmer, Pritzker, or Shapiro, I'd start thinking about vice presidential candidates to pair with them. Again, assuming Kamala Harris is not in, Stacey Abrams is another one that comes to mind. I think she could be very helpful in a place like Georgia, although she lost her own gubernatorial race in the state of Georgia. But I think you'd want to be cognizant of having a vice presidential candidate that provides some sort of like, I wouldn't pair any of those three people I just mentioned together. Perhaps Whitmer and Shapiro or Whitmer and Pritzker. But, I really think based on the future of the Democratic Party and the demographics that are really key to the Democrats, that you would need a minority African American Latino to balance out the ticket, to be appealing to Democratic voters, especially in the emerging states like Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina. That might be the new blue wall going to future elections, and eventually one day potentially Texas. Because I think demographically, I think the Democrats are going to be challenged in places like Wisconsin in the future.
Yeah.
Any final
Sure.
parting? We're just over an hour, and I think that it gets too long. It gets hard to watch. So maybe just final thoughts, if anybody has final things that something that they wanted to get to earlier that they didn't. Any other thoughts on the 2024 election?
The only thing I want to say that, if I'm sorry, and I just didn't mean to cut you off, Kevin. This kind of does make me sad because I do feel like, and this is not a necessarily a very academic thing to say. It just makes me sad from a standpoint of I work with the elderly, and I feel like to a degree, one of the things about Western society that troubles me is I don't think we have a lot of respect for our elders. And part of this does feel like this is a sort of a rejection of somebody who's older. But I do also, when I say that, I also at the same time recognize there's a problem, and we have to confront it. But I think that overall, it does kind of make me sad. I feel like this is a person who has served like his entire life honorably. And I think if he does resign, or not resign from the presidency, but if he does say, okay, you know what, because he is the nominee, right? Legally speaking, unless he chooses to give up his delegates, those are his. Legally speaking, they're bound to vote for him at the convention. And I think if he does it, I think that he will be remembered by history as just a patriot who has always put his country before himself and before his own interests. So even though it does make me sad to see it, I hope that he does do it ultimately, because I do think that either way he will be judged well. I think he's accomplished the most as a president since FDR or even LBJ, like in terms of getting things done. But people kind of that lag sometimes to catch up to realize that. And so, like I said, history is going to judge him very, very well.
Deron,
If he
final
drops out.
thoughts?
If he drops out, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that when FDR passed away in 1945, he was 63 years old.
Yeah.
He was like a really old 63.
Yeah,
We see how, we've looked at age. And even back then, when he ran for president, they all knew that he was ill.
Yep.
And
In 44.
they
Yep.
still ran him anyway in 1944. So that's what you ended up getting. So there's so many changing parts by the time people listen to this or watch it.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to be changing, between now and then. And usually that doesn't happen during this stage of the convention period in our political system. So this is all pretty new for all of us, for those who are watching this or listening. So we're doing our best job at taking a stab as to what's going to happen or what could happen. I still say from the get-go that at the start, this election is about democracy versus authoritarianism. And it still is the same way if Biden is on the ballot or not, because the Republican side, led by Donald Trump, isn't going to change anytime soon. And as we said before, I have voted for every political party there is. I think there is a clear delineation between both political parties. And one political party is pretty good at getting their message across, and that being the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party is kind of at a stage now where they're probably wishing that they didn't want to be in, where they have to explain themselves and explain away things about their candidate. This should be the period where they're focused on the end game of the election, and they're not at that stage yet. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. And Kevin, I want to thank you again, and Merri for being here, and Kevin for putting this together. It's a pleasure working with the two of you in the department at the college and talking about these issues. And I appreciate the people who are listening and watching this as well. So thank you for giving us the time too. Thank you.
Yeah. This was the first time I think we've ever had any sort of event in the summer, and it was put together just in like 24 hours. So thank you to both of you for that and being generous with your time in the summer. I don't know that I had prepared conclusion remarks thought of, but Merri's made me think of, I just wanted to piggyback on what she said. And it is sad. And I think it has the potential to have implications. I kind of worry about ageism of this kind of being, that this scenario could influence other elderly people and positions that they may be in still. And but that being said, I also, Biden has been, I'm 47. Biden has been in government longer than I've been alive. And, I do think that many Americans, we've said that they're unhappy with these two presidential candidates. I think people don't like career politicians. Generally speaking, I think there's a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience that Biden has brought because of his age and how long he served in government. But I also think that people are yearning for something different. And I think it's an opportunity for Democrats to have new leadership at the highest position. And it shouldn't. I think Biden has the potential to go out, as a hero if he handles this in a way that I think he should. And that is to say that he cannot multitask of being president for the final few months and campaign the way that he needs to match the moment. And so
is it fair to say though, Kevin, pardon me, I'm sorry, is it fair to say though that for the benefit of our listeners though, that really it's hard for any president to be able to run for president and also be president at the same time. It's almost an impossible task to do both, because one has to take more attention than the other. And it's usually almost always, if you're a good president, you put the country first before that of your campaign. But it's even harder, right, when you're also 81.
100%. And I think with also, like you mentioned, or somebody has mentioned, there's two major wars going on. He has the only president that I'm aware of that has been to battlefields in two different wars while being president. And to Deron's point about FDR, it's also a very different era of what we expect the president to be. And I think a lot of this is just unnecessary. We have put way too much on the U.S. president. We expect them to be a king, even though we have a separation of powers, checks and balance system. We expect them to solve every global crisis. We have emotional attachments to them. We expect them to be kind of this national leader in moments of crisis. It's unreasonable. And so I don't, to that point, it's a undaunting task for even the fittest of presidents. Yeah. And, but that being said, I think it becomes an extreme challenge for those who are not able to devote their full day and full energy to the job at hand to be president and to be campaigning for president again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all.